I want to talk a little bit today about incels. Now, this is often mentioned jokingly, but this is really a serious and important thing. It's often mentioned casually. You know, a lot of terrorism, a lot of domestic terrorist acts at their core are the results of incels. Now, you might not know what an incel is. Incel is short for involuntarily celibate, involuntarily celibate, incel. I hope that makes sense. And what it refers to is an incel is someone who would like to be in a sexual relationship, but they are unable to get into one because they either can't find someone to be in such a relationship with, or they're too, shy to try or whatever. So they're celibate, but not voluntarily, involuntarily. Now, whether this is funny or not, it's actually a real source of concern about the radicalizing effect of incel circumstances. And there's a new Secret Service report exactly about this. And I've mentioned this in the past many times. How many of these incidents that we are seeing are a combination of political radicalization and the frustrations of involuntary celibacy. Of course, never saying that anybody who can't find a date is going to go out and commit violence or active terror. Overwhelmingly, almost none of the people that are involuntarily celibate are going to go out and commit acts of violence. But is it a factor among some of those that do? A very interesting CBS write-up. New Secret Service report details growing incel terrorism threat. The federal government on Tuesday, today, released a study on the growing terrorism threat from men who call themselves anti-feminists or involuntarily celibates and draw motivation for violence from their inability to develop relationships with women. Almost exclusively, these are heterosexual men who would like a relationship with a woman and are unable to find one. Since 2014, attacks inspired by the incel movement and spanning the US and Canada have left dozens dead. Early intervention and behavioral threat assessments could be the difference between life and death for women targeted by the growing ideology, according to the 26-page report. The report concluded that while, quote, there is no one profile of an individual who plans or executes an act of targeted violence, investigators must consider potential targets when seeking to thwart attacks, as suspects routinely, quote, explore multiple targets during the planning process before making their final decision. The U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center took a deep dive into a series of red flags predating a shooting at a yoga studio in Florida to determine how early intervention could have saved lives. In the case of 40-year-old gunman Scott Paul Bayerly, there were countless warning signs. The man who opened fire inside Hot Yoga Tallahassee, killing 2 women and injuring 4 before committing suicide, had previously been fired from multiple teaching jobs, barred from bars in apartment buildings, and once authored a 70,000-word revenge fantasy about a boy-turned serial killer. There is a putting that particular story aside, the whole point here is an analysis of the idea that there are people motivated to carry out violence by their inability to either develop or maintain a relationship with women. Now, the report mentions, and it's important to consider, the origins of anti-feminist and incel movements vary, and they're not always the exact same thing. So there are people who are radicalized into extreme anti-feminist ideology, not necessarily by their personal inability to form a relationship with a woman, but some are. And then along those same lines, not all incels are anti-feminists. Some are just incels and they're fine with feminism, but they just can't develop relationships with women for what may be a number of different reasons. Now, Jordan Peterson has actually talked about this before. Jordan Peterson at one point talked about something called enforced monogamy. And he says that's not literally like you force people, you don't forcibly pair women off with men to prevent them from being incels. But here's what Jordan Peterson had to say about it.
Okay. So the question is, what do you mean by enforced monogamy?
Well, we could start by what I don't mean I don't mean taking innocent women at gunpoint and handing them over to useless men.
That's good. Okay, that's a good thing.
Which is essentially the accusation, you know, and it was really interesting to watch that unfold. What I meant was that monogamy as something that's socially valued appears to be essentially a human universal.
That does not actually seem to be true. I mean, that may well be true in modern society, but historically, that's not really been the case.
It doesn't mean that human beings are universally monogamous, because obviously we're not. We can be serially monogamous, and some people are players and have multiple partners and all of that. But there's a strong proclivity across known societies to tilt towards monogamy. And the enforcement is social norms. It's like, well, think about it. I can't believe that I even have to say this. Your son just gets married, and he comes home and he says, "Guess what, Dad? I've been screwing around." And what do? You pat him on the head and you say, "Hey, good work, kid. That's my young man." Right? Well, no, you're not happy about that. And he doesn't tell you because he knows you're not going to be happy about it. And that's enforced monogamy.
Okay, so the idea here is basically the way to fight this incel stuff is you have to socially show that monogamy is acceptable and lack of monogamy is not. But it really doesn't actually solve the problem. Even if socially not being monogamous is looked down upon, it's still not going to help a lot of these incels. That's just the reality. So it's not clear what we do with this type of information, but it is clear that the incel factor is a real enough factor that the Secret Service threat assessment is, to take a term from the former president, looking at it very strongly. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at dpacman. One of our longtime sponsors is Vincero Collective. If you don't know Vincero yet, it's the place to go for quality watches, sunglasses, and more. Serious style, undeniable quality, and total versatility put Vincero really at the top of the game, and their newest watch release is no exception. It's the Argo Automatic. It spotlights everything I love about Vincero. I got the Argo Automatic in frost white. This is a dive watch, which is, of course, a staple in the watch world, but I really think Vincero found a way to make this one stand out. I love the gradient blue accent of the hour markers against the solid white face. I really love all of their watches, and I own a bunch, but the Argo is probably my favorite so far. Vincero sunglasses and jewelry and other accessories are awesome too. An excellent way to elevate any outfit. Vincero Collective is giving my audience 15% off all products and free shipping. Go to vincerocollective.com/Pacman and use the code Pacman. The link is down below.